Well, Morkoc, senior Republican spokesman, joins me now from California to discuss the top stories tonight. First, the tragic Minneapolis incident and then Trump's tariff threat. Good to have you this weekend, Errol. How does the administration respond to allegations that the federal agents involved in the shooting were overly aggressive and escalated the situation? Given the conflicting accounts of what happened, I mean, if you've seen the video, 6 to 7 men against one person, I don't know.
Yes, it's certainly a tragedy, and it's something that every American is sad to see. Unfortunately, in the United States, if you want to resist arrest, those 7 men, by the way, were trying to resist, to stop him from resisting using nonviolent means. They were trying to subdue him. And he was, in the end, carrying what was a $2,000 Sig Sauer pistol, a gun that's very expensive, and he had come there with ammunition, no identification, and obviously with a clear intent to cause harm. When the federal agents saw the gun, in US law, you declare gun. Now, if my fellow agent says gun, I don't have to see that gun to know it's a threat. And if he can pull that gun out that quickly and shoot an agent, that's how quickly he got shot. In this situation, you do not bring guns to fistfights with federal agents, and then when you go down, reach for your gun. In that situation, you will be shot, and in that situation, he was shot, unfortunately for him, and every single agent there used an appropriate lethal force.
Now, can the administration explain why federal agents, blocked state investigators from assessing the crime scene, and will they cooperate with the state investigation? It seems like the states are totally different bodies from the federal government. Why isn't the state permitted to have access to the crime scene? And there are different, angles to this, by the way. I'm sure you must have laid your eyes on the shots from different angles. The one by the pedestrian or bystander seemed to have a different, account of what you just said, because it seems like the person was already down. And this is an intensive care doctor.
Yes, the person was down, and then that's when it was discovered that he had a gun on his hip. And you can turn a gun like this, in about a quarter of a second and kill a man. And so, unfortunately for him, when you're in a fight, it doesn't matter that. Also, for that doctor, by the way, just because you're a doctor and you take a very nice photograph doesn't mean that you're some sort of qualified observer. You're not law enforcement. You are just some observer. Now, in regards to how this plays out, the state doesn't supersede federal authority. The federal government is conducting the investigation. This was a federal criminal situation, and the state doesn't have any jurisdiction here whatsoever. Moreover, considering how that state has behaved as a sanctuary state, basically abrogating federal law, this is what the Confederacy did, by the way. This is not permissible in U.S. law, so they're in a lot of trouble there. But while there are conflicting reports, and again, our heart does go out to the man who died there, but he died fighting federal agents while armed with a very serious gun, and when that gun was discovered, he was shot to protect the agents involved. In the future, I think that anybody watching that would be shocked to imagine that somebody would attack federal agents with a weapon and then expect to be shown leniency when all of the attacks, especially on just two National Guardsmen who were near, one was killed and one was brutally injured in DC, and the attacks on all of our great brave men and women of ICE, and the hate they've had to experience in Minnesota by these paid agitators. If you want to bring a gun there, expect to be dealt with severely.
Now, I believe these are immigration officers, right? And these guys are meant to be trained. If someone is trying to reach for a gun, you would expect that probably a shot on the hand or the leg or something just to, calm the situation. No. But straight in the head was the issue with Ringgood. Yeah. But with this, you don't, as a professional, you save a life first. I understand that the, immigration officers were trying to get access to him. And by the way, while we're having this conversation, we have to have at the back of our minds that Trump is, the issue of gun laws have come up time and time again, and he's advocated even before he came into office for every American to own a gun. Now you see why the ripple effect can, come in such a manner.
Yes, well, in regard to the Second Amendment, it's the constitutional right for every American to have a gun. In regard to the situation, in a perfect world, if we had, AI police officers who could shoot the gun out of people's hands or some sort of, situation, but that's not the real world. In the real world, once you show lethal force towards a police officer, the police officer's responsibility is to protect, first of all, the citizenry around him, and then second of all, himself and his fellow officers who have family and children and friends who love them. Now, in a perfect world, yes, you would shoot the guy in the leg like in some 1950s movie and you would disarm the guy. But the fact of the matter is, a man charging at you with a knife from 30 yards can take 6 or 7 9mm rounds to the body as he charges at you. The distance closed between a perpetrator and a victim is incredibly high, incredibly close. In that situation, when he has a gun that he can point from his back and shoot anybody, at that point, it is a shoot to kill situation. In Renee Good's situation, she was committing a vehicular mistake, but that mistake involved hitting somebody with a car. That agent had been earlier dragged over 30 feet. He had internal bleeding from the impact of that vehicle, and he shot to kill, as they are trained to do in the United States of America. Because, as you mentioned, we have a high rate of gun ownership, and that gun ownership requires responsibility and respect. And if you are not going to respect the Second Amendment and you're not going to respect the government's right and monopoly on violence, you might find yourself on the wrong side of that. And if you're going to bring a gun to a fist fight with federal agents, you might find yourself shot in the head because that's the rules that everybody in this country plays by. And the only people who are doing this are these extreme paid agitators. You don't see, by the way, there's not anybody out there protesting for all these. Where are the Somalians out there protesting and fighting? No, it's a bunch of paid left-wing white agitators who go around from place to place to place, thinking that they can use their quote-unquote white privilege to dox and tail and follow and shadow federal agents and prevent them from doing things like arresting child traffickers and child rapists. So these are not good people who are behaving this way, and they're finally, for the first time, experiencing the consequences of their actions, something that perhaps their white privilege isn't going to protect them from this administration, which sees all Americans as American and doesn't give anybody preferential treatment.
Now, Errol, quickly, I told you about time consciousness here. I just want you to answer this in one sentence. What is the threshold for determining when someone possesses a threat or poses a threat to law enforcement?
When somebody is in active combat with a federal or law enforcement agent, and it is revealed that they have a deadly weapon on them that they are potentially reaching for, that is when the threshold is crossed.
All right, then. Finally, on this Minneapolis shooting, will the Trump administration reconsider its immigration enforcement strategies in light of these incidents? It's becoming a thing. What steps should be taken to prevent
I think they're going to be more
tragedies in the
emboldened
future?
to
Let me be
step up
done.
and protect the street.
Yeah. So what steps will be taken to prevent similar tragedies in the future, Errol? I mean, we can keep having Americans being killed. I mean, these are people who have families and loved ones.
Right. Well, important to bring that up because in this year we've had a 21% drop in homicide rates in the United States, the largest drop in homicides since 1900. That's an incredible amount of people. That is tens and tens of thousands of people. 1 in 5 people who are going to be murdered this year were not murdered because of the strong on crime anti-crime beliefs of this administration, and that has great part to do with ICE and removing these violent criminals from our society. Now, all we're going to do is keep up the pressure. We're going to keep going into these communities. We're going to keep getting the people who we know are criminals, who are not supposed to be here, and we're going to get them out. And if in the process of that, a few people decide to try to abrogate the will of the American people who voted for this, and there are casualties or collateral damage, it's far less than the collateral damage of the extremely high murder rates that we just had. So we're going to double down on security and peace and safety for our citizens. And if that means that people who are agitators are going to have to face the music, we're sorry, but these should be a lesson to anybody out there that the US government is not playing. You cannot impede federal investigations. And if you do so, we will use lethal force. And we will continue to use lethal force until every American citizen is protected from both violent domestic and violent illegal criminals, which our data is showing us that our actions are doing because of the reduced homicide rate, which is once again the lowest since 1900, a 21% drop in deaths.
All right, then, even though some people say some particular states are being targeted, but then let's move to this 100% tariff real quickly. We have just, what, 3 minutes to go. Why did President Trump choose to threaten tariffs now, just days after praising Canada's new trade deal with China?
Yeah, I think it's a little bit of the hot cold, and it has to do with Canada's attention towards the American approach in Greenland. In the end, 90% of Canadians live on the border with the United States, and 70% of all Canadian trade is with the United States. Canada's biggest mistake, of course, was not coexisting or commingling their energy through the Keystone Pipeline into the United States, losing them any leverage they might have had in negotiations with us. So I think Trump right now, he doesn't like Mark Carney. And he very much wants to drive a wedge in some of the Canadian foreign policy. This will obviously be fixed very quickly. This is one of those things where Trump comes in hard and he pulls back. He doesn't like what China's doing involving Greenland, and so he's going to use Canada as a scapegoat. And he doesn't like Mark Carney at all, and he specifically pulled him off the board of peace, if you want to call it that, in Gaza. So right now, I think we're seeing two world leaders kind of quid pro quo. But in the end, Canada, 70% of their trade comes to us. We only 5% of our trade to them. Tariffs only go one way for them. They'll come back to the drawing table and we'll figure it out. This is just more of Trump's kind of bully pulpit that he's using right now.
So I've thought of the scenario several times, and not to say that one who knows international relations so deeply, but then it's like a country saying they want to do business with another country, and then a lot of people asking, what's your business though? But then let's move to how the administration will mitigate the potential price hikes on American consumers, especially for goods like lumber, aluminium, and auto parts that heavily rely on Canadian imports. Plus, will the U.S. be prepared to face retaliatory, tariffs from Canada, potentially harming American agricultural exports and other industries? And what's the plan to address that?
Yeah, well, first, the tariffs they could put on us would be minimal compared to what we would put on them, just because they import so little of us. And our farming sector is something that we heavily subsidize. So if they do anything there, we would just subsidize the farmers out of that situation. On the other side, though, one thing we've noticed with the Trump administration, they'll make these bombastic statements, and then in the subtext, they will exempt some of the key industries from that. So I think that would be the short term. And also, by the time these tariffs get in the swing of things, Trump and Mark Carney will probably have already figured out what about the China deal Trump didn't like. Obviously, the U.S. doesn't have a right to dictate all foreign policy in the in North America, but I certainly think that he had some problems with the situation that China did involving the deal involving Chinese vehicles, because the U.S. and Canadian auto industry are very intertwined, and the Canadian government has sold out the Canadian auto manufacturing industry, which is tied to Detroit. And I think that perhaps is why Donald Trump is very mad, especially including the mineral rights deals and stuff that China's been going around trying to secure. He feels that that's an encroachment on his hemisphere, the Don Row doctrine, as he calls it. And I think that's probably why, in the short term, there will be a little bit of a disagreement. But I think very quickly they will solve this one, as Trump isn't going to be too serious about this in the long term, I don't think.
Just real quickly before we run, how would the administration balance the goal of protecting U.S. industries with the risk of disrupting integrated supply chains and causing job losses in sectors like automotive manufacturing?
Well, again, that would only be if these tariffs were able to go their full length, and in that case, you would obviously have to have some sort of auto subsidies or whatnot. But in the end, I think they're going to come to a deal far before that comes to be a reality.
All right, then thank you so much, Morkoc, for joining us. He's senior Republican spokesperson, joined us from California.